I'm going to open by posting and reading a poem by Philip Larkin. They fuck you up, your mom and dad, they may not mean to, but they do. They fill you with the faults they had and had some extra just for you. But they were fucked up in their turn by fools in old style hats and coats who half the time were soppy stern and half at one another's throats. Man, hands on misery to man, it deepens like a coastal shelf. Get out as early as you can and don't have any kids yourself. So that's my summary of Oedipal psychoanalysis. And then my summary of these two chapters is, no, you're wrong. It's society, you idiots. Okay, I'm done.
By the way, I used to share that with my students after Hamlet.
After what?
Hamlet.
Oh.
Because it's, it fits. But also after sharing that after Hamlet, I like to point out the two meanings in the first line. Right? So there's the obvious, right? If, they fuck you up, they mess with your head, right? But how are babies made?
But what?
How are babies made? That's the way it's phrased, and the comma right there kind of invites you, like almost like they cook you up, but they fuck you up, now here you are.
Thrown into the world.
I like seeing people that way, as like looking at them as a fuck up, and it's a good way to kind of deterritorialize people from molar aggregates to these molecular combinations of desire.
I'll take
I think
it.
it's a great way to think of it.
I oftentimes, I think the same way, right? Like, oh yeah, but I oftentimes think, most normal people, probably accidents. And then there's every once in a while, like somebody who totally is acting like a narcissist in a public space. And I think to myself, oh yeah, you were definitely a planned baby. One of those rare planned babies. Your parents totally wanted you, and then they gave you everything you wanted every second of your life, and now you're a complete asshole. Not like all the rest of us normal accidents. Yeah.
I honestly don't know what else to say.
Oh wait, I was gonna say something.
Oh yeah, well I guess actually Eric.
Oh, I know what to say. Like and subscribe to this YouTube video for more conversations like these.
For more stimulating conversations like this. What were you gonna say, Eric?
Oh no, just real quickly. I had some difficulty getting through some of this reading. I want to say last week the reading seemed to thread together more, and this time it just didn't seem like the pieces I couldn't make them fit in my head. So maybe it's more me than it was the reading. But I did have this thought that I just wanted to bring out before we dive deeper. I was just recalling that when we were reading Phenomenology, it was Chase who was complaining about the language and how difficult it was to make sense of the text. I want to say Hegel's a little bit easier to understand than DMG, at least from this section. But
so, I'll say I was not the only one complaining about Hegel. That is, although I definitely was, and I don't know. Okay, I find this book, I think, is in particular, okay, so Guattari is like, he's the worst with all the terminology. If you look at his solo material, it's just outrageous. Just the jargon is off the charts. I think Deleuze is a much better writer, really. Guattari is really like, he's kind of like the crazy idea guy. Like, ideas, connections, let's do this. Like, I got another idea, Gilles, let's write about this, And then Deleuze is like, calm down, Felix. Let's like structure this, Let's like do some like Kantian like architectonics, all this stuff, and tries to calm it down, but still I think this book in particular, it's kind of like, oh yeah, it's difficult. I mean, really, I could complain about it, but oh well. Oh yeah, there he is. Yeah, he keeps trying to. He'll like almost like fall over, because he still thinks he can like maneuver out of it by just like moving his head, and yeah, physics, yeah.
If no one has something to say, I quite enjoyed the last chapter of part 3, particularly. It was difficult, but it seemed like definitely one I need to reread, probably a couple times, to fit, the place Oedipus has in each of the machines. But I quite liked the claim Freud was the Adam Smith and the Luther of psychiatry. It reminds me of both Marx and Nietzsche, kind of like what Nietzsche is doing in genealogy, with looking at kind of like criticizing philosophy to that point, kind of just taking morals as basically for what it is, uncritically. Same with Marx and the vulgar economists. I feel like that's kind of what they're doing here with Freud. With, just first of all, placing Oedipus as, I guess, for granted, the child is kind of like the emphasis there, and leaving the parents be. Yeah, I don't know if y'all saw that connection at all. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that part as well, and I think that's a pretty good comparison. That, I mean, I don't know if people have really, it seems pretty original to me, in that I don't recall anyone. Well, they say they get it from at least the Adam Smith thing from Marx, who also said it about Luther. Yeah, they're just extending that, which I think it makes sense. But okay, yeah, and then I guess this kind of ties in with. So Eric, you were saying that there was parts where you just had trouble. It didn't seem to fit or whatnot. So I think the last section of chapter 3 that we read, that was really, it really tied it together. It was kind of like, finally, even the chapter title, Oedipus at Last. It's like, finally we figure out, what the hell Oedipus is, and it makes sense. Like, that was the first time reading that. I was like, oh, okay, now I get it. It's like, it took 260 pages, but I think now I understand what the Oedipus complex is, and their position on it. And also I understand how it connects with capitalism and all these things. So yeah, I thought it tied a lot of things together. But then, yeah, the first section, the 4th chapter, that's just kind of like the beginning of everything again, to a certain degree. I mean, they're kind of setting up a new thing with this whole, the two poles of investment between the paranoiac and the schizophrenic. So it's a little new, I think. And then they set it up as a kind of like a molecular thing, and they do all these divisions and whatnot, which I think they're going to go into more detail, obviously, in the next few chapters. So, but anyways, I think it really, I don't know, did other people get that sense from the third chapter that it closed with a way of kind of tying it together that helped?
Yeah, I got that. Yeah, yes, I got that sense, but because I don't understand Freud well, and I don't understand Lacan at all, and I don't understand, well, anyway, because I can read what they feel like to me, which I don't think they are. I mean, I think that they actually give us arguments, but it feels to me like a series of assertions, and I don't really understand the defense of those assertions. So I understand in the sense that, you know, that they say, well, Oedipus is really the result of this social repression, and it has this sort of universal aspect because in some sense capitalism is kind of the limit of, you know, this kind of system, and that's tied up with Oedipus. I mean, I kind of understand those basic ideas, but I don't understand the argument that connects them together. But again, that's, I think, largely just because I don't understand the details of you know, the things they're appealing to. You know, like, I mean, I don't get fired up because I don't have a dog in this race, not because I don't think it's interesting or important, but just because I don't know this stuff. So, you know, if I was a Freudian or a Lacanian, I might have a strong reaction to this because, you know, say, well, no, you're wrong. It really is about the family, not about social repression. But I just don't know I don't have the background to feel that way or to try to defend, you know, Deleuze and Guattari against the Freudians or the Freudians against the other guys. And so that's kind of, I have a general overview, like you said, of how they're kind of wrapping this up. And I have a general idea of the big ideas that they're kind of laying out there, but I don't really see how that, I don't understand the structure of the defense really.
Yeah, I would second that. Where I said it was like the things aren't quite fitting together for me. I feel like the threads are brought into proximity with each other. They're just not being wrapped together or snapped, you know, into nice fitting in my reading. Because, and I think it's the same because I don't have the same kind of background with Freud and Lacan. I felt like I could roughly understand the Oedipal complex before reading this book, with lots of reservations. Like I can see it kind of work in our society, but I really don't think it is a universal kind of explanation for all sorts of behavior. And then I appreciate that, you know, our book here is like, yeah, you know, it's Oedipus, the Oedipal complex isn't everything. And then we get to this chapter and it's like, yes, well, you see, this is why the Oedipal complex is everything in our capitalist society. And it just throws me back to where, like, I thought maybe it had some explanatory power, but I don't want to I don't tend to think of it as explaining everything, in the sense that D&G want to allow it to explain everything. And then I don't know how much of that is a function of like not having a normal family upbringing. You know what I mean? I want to question first off, like how much the way Freud and other psychoanalysis really put up this, you know, the Oedipal complex, this mommy, daddy, me, like all the time. I keep hearing, well, you know, not everybody had a mommy, daddy, me. You know what I mean? Like a lot of people just had a mommy, you know, or various other, you know, I know psychoanalysis has ways to kind of like amend it, but it feels a bit artificial to me, you know, to kind of say, well, yeah, everybody wants to kill their father so they can sleep with their mother. And then in cases where there's only one parent, you just kind of assign both roles to one parent. It seems a bit post hoc, kind of just trying to make the theory fit. Anyway, I'm just saying out loud that I've long been suspicious of the Oedipus complex. I do see that it applies, but I think, you know, it doesn't. I suspect that Freud and future, other psychoanalysts were very much, their point of reference was the bourgeois world. Again, it's been much discussed how Freud got a lot of his theories by dealing with very privileged women, women coming from very privileged households, and that a lot of his psychoanalysis is based on that particular social class. And so, again, I wonder if much of psychoanalysis is like, again, people that are fairly wealthy or, academics coming from that particular class of society, assuming that everybody had a mommy, daddy, and then, yeah, I guess in some, you know what I mean? We'll just tweak the theory, does that make any sense? Yeah. I'm more or less just agreeing with Nevitt, just saying I'm in the same boat as Nevitt with little extras.
Yeah, so I think that makes sense, but the fact that, yeah, it's not always mommy, daddy, me, but I guess there's a sort of structural account that it seems like can work in this kind of ad hoc way to fit anything within its structure. But okay, so what is actually going on with the Oedipus thing here? So I think Nathan said this too, like a while back, of that they're kind of shifting from saying Oedipus is nothing to Oedipus is everything. And I think that's clearly wrong. That is not at all what they're saying. They're not saying it's doing everything, and they're not saying it's doing nothing. I think they're very specific about what it is and how it operates. And, it's never, there's very much a stress that Oedipus is an effect, and it's not kind of the thing that's affecting society in this kind of way. So it's not really an actor so much. It's just simply a kind of accumulation in some way, but an accumulation that is actually kind of very helpful for the reproduction of the whole system. So, okay, I think to kind of like go over the basic outline of their argument, I think would be really helpful. Okay, so I think one of the way that makes the most sense to me is, okay, so their idea is that, okay, they say that there's these simulacra, these images of images, secondary images, and that's what the family determinations are. So those are the private persons. This is mommy, daddy, me. And those are just these imprints, reflections, displacements from social persons, which have to do with the social field. So this would be they're derived from flows, and they kind of represent that. So this is the capitalist is derived from the flow, the conjunction of the flows of money, the worker from the flows of labor. So you get these kind of abstract kind of positions, social positions, based off of how their whole kind of thing they talked about before, about these flows kind of join together and create these differential relations. And that's what really that's what's really going on with capitalism. That's its kind of thing. It's this field of forces of all these different money splits in these different types to the point where it can reproduce itself. And from there, you get persons are kind of these abstractions that yet are made concrete by the fact that that's what capitalism does. It takes these abstract quantities, and it makes them concrete. And I think there's something about, like, what is it to like live in capitalism? I think that's a pretty good description of how there's all this abstract, these images floating around, these quantities and whatnot, and but yet it makes them concrete. They're very real forces going on. So I think that's kind of like this first level of the social, and then from there you'll get this family determinations. So that has to do with, so why are the familiar roles merely simulacra? So they're taking their form. So they describe this using this kind of Aristotelian hylomorphic kind of way of talking about it, where they're saying that it's like the family no longer has anything to do with social production and reproduction. It's all about, that's all capital now. So money, labor, your work, that's all the important stuff in terms of social production, blah, blah, blah. So what happens with the family? The family is no longer involved with that. There's this segregation into the private sphere of the family. It loses its power. And because of that, it becomes merely this kind of matter to be formed by these determinations from these social positions of, worker capitalists, these archaic territories, whatnot. So from there, you get these kind of molds from the social, and these molds from the social kind of pressed down into the matter, kind of like brand it. And that's where you get, so the simulacra is an image of an image. So you can see that first you got, the flows going, they form these breaks, these intersections, flow of money, you get the capitalist. For the capitalist, you get daddy. And saying, okay, flows of labor, you get the worker. From the worker, you get the child. Yeah. And so that's kind of the thing. I think, though, the way that the family is private is segregated now from the social field of, economics and whatnot, which is now the kind of the major force. I think that is really the key. And that's why Oedipus, it's not really, it's an effect more so than, or kind of a quasi-cause, I guess, than any kind of a cause. It's not really doing everything. It's kind of like everything in the capitalist field. It's a bunch of forces among forces. So the family just becomes this mold shaped by these social determinations. Those become familiar determinations, but that itself becomes this kind of a kind of school to build up this subjectivity that is actually necessary for capitalist reproduction. So we end up kind of internalizing by living these kind of this sort of particular form of asceticism and whatnot. We will then internalize and have this kind of mold of subjectivity that makes us prime for those social determinations that put us into those familiar determinations to begin with. So the fact that I'm a child, I get raised as a child, I'm being raised as a worker. Obviously education stuff is, you can see that too. That's kind of, these are all training grounds, but the family is this kind of training ground for the social determinations that molded it to begin with. But the way that those are separate, so that if you focus just on the superficial image, you only see, oh, it's mommy, daddy, me. This is where all the neurosis is. But you don't see that there's social determinations behind those, social forces behind those. And I think that's really the key argument there, is that, yeah, it's not about the familiar reduction and all that stuff, which, you know, most people agree now, but instead focus on these social forces. That's what this, you know, schizoanalysis, what does it do? That's what it does. It takes, you know, these kind of images, say, and breaks them apart and looks at what forces are animating them. You know, in the same way, Nietzsche, he would say, okay, what force, you know, occupies a person to make this possible? You know, what is so this one expression they use, the collective enunciation. Yeah, the statement of collective statement of whatever, something like that. That seems to be kind of like what Nietzsche is talking about too, when he's kind of thinking of these different like forces and how they form different types of people. Like you get a priest or something like that because of the way that these forces kind of come together. In the same way, even an individual person does something because a force kind of takes over them. I think they're thinking in the same way about these social fields and family determinations and whatnot. But yeah, so Oedipus, though, it's this thing where it finally so this, all the representation stuff, I think is still difficult to see exactly, because it seems like it's saying that okay, there's this long kind of migration where at first it's this displaced kind of thing. So the representation has to do with the incest prohibition. And, you know, at first it's almost like it doesn't really matter. It doesn't have anything to do with it. It's not possible. And then in the despotic social machine, it becomes just this kind of like symbolic thing. It's symbolic, but then it, in the same way that despotic kind of organization, it ends up getting recapitulated in the capitalist, along with a lot of these familial determinations in the social field as well, because the familial determinations come from the social determinations, that then you get this kind of so it's you know, the father as a relation with the son. This is clear, it's coming from the despot and that despotic organization. In the same way that gets kind of taken in and internalized as just one function among many in the capitalist social field, that's the force really there that then becomes also the familial determination of the father function. So the despot becomes the father. This is why they're saying that Lacan is right. Like, this makes sense. This, you know, and it. But again, yeah, it's something that can be universally kind of extrapolated to make that point, you know, kind of throughout the whole book. But now we can see in the kind of parameters in which Lacan's thing does make sense for our time, capitalism. But in a way, because it's this archaic kind of thing from the despotic, but that's still active within the capitalist, but as this kind of particular social determination that then becomes the familial determination of the law of the father. It now makes sense.
So
yeah.
can I try to give you a quick summary of your summary to see if I'm on the right track here? So So you, at one point, and I don't know which one of those, the despotic and then whatever the second one was, social formation. But anyway, that at some point in the past, the family actually was a family, and the family was a manifestation of the social codes. And so that was something like when the family was not a simulacrum, because the family codes were kind of integrated into the social codes. But then along the way, let's say especially in capitalism breaks all those codes apart and then reassembles things under axioms rather than codes. And so it reassembles something that appears to be a family, and it looks like a family, but it's not the same. It's not the same kind of family, the organic family that existed in those earlier forms. It's now this simulacrum of a family that it has assembled under these axioms for the purpose of serving capitalist production. And then when you mentioned Lacan, are they saying that he's correct in saying that this familial manifestation of Oedipus really gets socialized? But the reason is because capitalism finds that despotic signifier represented by the name of the father to be useful also for the purpose, I don't know what, for exerting authority in a capitalist state or something, but that sort of social, or I don't know what the right way to put it, but that sort of socialized version of Oedipus reemerges, but not, like you said, not because it's the primary thing, but because it is a useful structure or construct, again, for the purposes of capitalist production. Is that a fair summary? Because that I kind of understand. I mean, that after you put that through that way, I can kind of make sense of.
Yeah, I think that was really good. Especially as you kind of made the point that there's kind of a, so they probably wouldn't want to say organic just because they don't hate, but the organism is kind of a restrictive structure in their opinion or whatnot. So they have this idea of that there are kind of, let's say, natural family units, and that the family unit we understand now is this nuclear family, that is a kind of artificial kind of structure, I guess. Yeah, it's artificial because it's created by this later social formation as just a function for its own reproduction. I think a lot of this also has to do, okay, so what is like the function that the family is really doing? I think it has to do, so the Eugene Hall in the guide, I think, makes this pretty clear, that what it's kind of doing is it's the whole thing where anti-production gets cycled back into production in capitalism. That's really the thing that it internalizes when it creates the subjects, us as people. And the fact that, okay, so I think something like an example may be good. I'll try to just kind of explain what I think it is going on. Okay, so when you're growing up, okay, well, yeah, you're a kid. The idea is you're taught, kind of control yourself, same way like the anus is privatized, control your flows there, don't shit everywhere, control yourself, have this kind of private, individualized kind of thing. And in the same way, so you start, now everything then becomes, okay, sex, desire, anything like that. Also, the same thing with shit, but now internalize that, make that private. Don't express it, do it on your own time, maybe go to the bathroom, do something, but we don't want to see your desire, we don't want to see your shit. And then that's really kind of the training that goes on with a family until you get to, okay, so that's good. Now, what do I get from that? So now when I go to work, I've already understood. I know how to repress my desire. I know how to delay gratification. I can do all these things. You know, I know not to, you know, do any kind of like glorious expenditure of the surplus or anything like that. I'm a responsible adult. And now I can go get hired by the firm and devote it. Was, you know, my father, he taught me a good work ethic. You know, he taught me, you know, you go 100% every time. You know, and if somebody, that's how you get the job. That's how you do it. You know, no lollygagging. So now, having been properly disciplined by my father, I'm going to be a great worker. So I can now go to work. I can delay gratification. I've got this work ethic that I've internalized as what I believe is myself. And that, what does that consist of? It consists of working a lot, unless if I don't, I feel guilty, you know. So I work for the benefit of this company so they can extract my surplus labor and get surplus value and all this stuff. And then it becomes great for them. Not that they have any people necessarily, but yeah, I get to help because my family raised me right. I get to help, you know, capitalist reproduction. And if I've really done it right, then I'll be a good, normal human subject, and I'll settle down with maybe a little lady and start my own little family and have my own little Oedipuses and, you know, little Chase Jr., you know, and he can hate his father too, and I can tell him like, oh, what are you doing, shitting everywhere, like what, you know, yeah, okay.
So then would the, you know, like with that training thing, so is this correct that you're then trained to obey your literal father in the capitalist family, so that when you move into becoming a productive capitalist as an adult, then you are now prepared to obey the big father? I don't know if that's like, is that Lacan's name of the father, but the family prepares you to, you know, to feel to feel obligated to follow the dictates of the power structures in the society, because you've been prepared for that by your literal father. Is that correct?
I think so, yeah. And I think that is kind of the, you know, I'm not sure exactly how much Lacan kind of, you know, made this connection himself, but I know, you know, like Zizek, like obviously does, you know, like the big other, like who is it's capitalism, you know, duh. Which I think that kind of goes along with, for the most part, kind of what they're saying here, that this structure is definitely going on. That although I think one thing is, though, that they're saying that there's a little more at work than a kind of, I would say, like a kind of like direct like force relation, you know, like physical force kind of thing. And really, so what the family really taught is how to kind of internalize that for ourselves. So we learn to repress ourselves, and we kind of internalize. We got a little talking father, you know, law of the father, like already in our own head. And I think that's really the kind of key point. Well, okay, so this is really like the distinctive kind of efficiency of these new forms of power. And so Foucault, he really I think does a good job of explaining this, in the sense that, people think, oh, these people used to be barbarians back in the day, and they had public executions and all this horrible stuff, and we're really progressive and modern, and aren't we great? We don't have these awful things anymore. This idea shows, well, first of all, it was not, none of these things came about through people having a good motivation, a kind of innocent motivation to these things. They did these things because it made power more efficient. It was not about, human rights, progress, or whatever. That's just a way to make power operate more efficiently, which usually means internalized, or in other words, or just simply displaced by simulacra. So you don't even know what the hell you're doing or what you desire, and that's kind of the thing. That's why they think so this Oedipus thing, it's kind of like it's now at the point where, because of these kind of artificial segregations and kind of like mix matching of all these different things, that and this limitation of desire away from the social field towards these familial images, that has so displaced everything that's how we get this very strange situation. But then at the same time, they say that, in the 4th chapter, they talk about this, that really on this unconscious level, really it bypasses the familial determinations and goes straight to the social field. That's what we always invest desire unconsciously in the social field. But then there's kind of this backwash, like a reflux onto these images of, molar aggregates, people, family, people, blah, 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 all that. Which I think that also, they didn't say it, but they're getting some of this stuff from Freud's kind of model of the psyche. Especially, so the word reflux especially is I just remember this from Difference Repetition, and the fact that the superego is this reflux of libido, and that creates the superego and all this cool stuff. And I recognized it here too, except they don't say it. But that's one of those things that, they usually don't spell something out like that. But maybe, I think that's the kind of thing that people that know a lot of Freud, they would see something like that and pick up on it, and it would be like, oh, okay, I see. But it said, a lot of times we read in like, what the fuck, reflux, libido, it's kind of confusing, but okay. Anyways, that help, hopefully. I have not been looking at the chat at all. I'm gonna try to glance over it though.
I don't exactly know the answer to a question that Neva posted in the chat, which was, how does the name of the Father kind of fit into the system that we're talking about here, the system that you're describing there, this perspective, and that I can't speak to, because I would need, I think, a more robust sense of their interpretation of the idea from Lacan, and a more robust sense of how they, what they like about it and what they don't, But just as sort of a going back to just this is a thing I wanted to say, just about the note that the thing they like about Lacan, and this is a big thing that I was feeling a lot during this reading, was like, there are a lot of parts of this that I thought like, oh yeah, that's totally sure. And it's like you said, Chase, it's like sometimes there'll be 2 or 3 pages where it's just like, yeah, people are definitely, it's like people are affected by their social surroundings. It's like that's basically like at the heart of what they're saying. And it's like, yeah, I agree. You know, it's like, or they're making this point of like, and then these things that like Lacan could easily agree with when he's saying things like, desire is the desire of the other, and the unconscious is the effect of language on a subject, you know, and language is the, you know, language of the other, the gap of the absolute otherness or whatever. But okay, so and then they said a thing that you said that I agreed with was, it seems like a thing they like about it, and this is something that Zizek, and now this is something I've heard actually from some people in the DMG collective. They're like, if you ever read a person, like usually somebody who works more in this kind of philosophy, like if you read somebody and they specifically do not ever mention one or two particular thinkers, there's a pretty good chance that there's some stuff borrowed from that thinker that might. And I think that that's true about Zizek with Deleuze. I'm becoming more and more convinced by the day that I think Zizek is like really internalizing a lot, not in whatever capital I internal. No, he's borrowing, I think, a good amount, and at least a lot of key concepts where I encountered them first in him, and then I see them right here, you know, very plainly. So okay, one of them here being that they like Lacan because he has this crazy conception of this socialized, you know, totally exploded out Oedipal thing called the name of the father, right? And they're like, well, look, this, you know, it's kind of archaic, right? But weirdly enough, it's relevant now under capitalism, because capitalism kind of necessarily orients and formats experience and social organization under money, such that that sort of analysis would be very accurate. That would be a very, you know, not only would the processes at hand have a tendency to be designed in order to produce the circumstances that would generate this sort of subject that you're talking about, but then producing a theory for it is almost is at least in a sense functionally reinforcing it. And Lacan has this, you know, and Lacan's a pessimist. Lacan's very pessimistic. He's like, yeah, there's a master signifier. We are caught in the loop of desire. And there's a master signifier that kind of, I would say, I don't want to say grounds, but there's a master signifier that directs the show, the performance of the pure repetition of desire. It's all kind of directed by, yeah, well, why is capitalism particularly suited for the socialized Oedipus? Well, this mass, okay. Oh, geez. This master, sorry, I'm adjusting my legs. This master signifier and its relationship to the subjects involved in the process of the repetition of desire, it basically it's something that, you remember the book by Mark Fisher, Capitalist Realism, where he's like it's easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine a different, you know, like a different economic mode. Well, okay, the way that the master signifier works basically is that it's like a linguistic structure that functions very similarly to like the structure of like a currency, like the structure of our currency. I'll tell you how. Or I'll try to. So when we try to explode the system, when we try to rebel, we try to blow up the master signifier or destroy it, or, you know, whatever, remove it, it seems to be brought back up. We all kind of coagulate and or maybe not we, but like in a sense it delimits what can be said or expressed as the available, it's basically like what the available grid work from which viable social positions and expressions can be chosen from. Like if somebody in an elementary school, and this is just one of a million different settings where confrontations happen, where social confrontations happen that make up the fold of the social field. A teacher asks me, what do you want to be? Little Hunter. And then if I said like a war criminal, she would be like, okay, well, we need to get you to somebody. Somebody needs to see you. You need to talk to somebody professionally until this goes away. This is not that's not an option. If I said like, oh yeah, I want to make like chemical gas for warfare, then she'd be like, well, sorry, that's not, you need to see somebody until that goes away. So like, there's this social, so there's this master signifier that, and that master signifier comes through. It's not just like social codes of conduct and politeness and, I guess like Geneva Conventions and stuff. It's not just that. But it's this, it's always, and that's the hard part about talking about it is that it's always over there is a big thing Lacan talks about, but whatever. The point is, we try to get rid of it. We try to free ourselves and say like, we're gonna liberate ourselves from this, this infinite repetition of desire. Because the reason we're infinitely repeating this, or we're engaging in this infinite repetition of desire, is because the master signifier is kind of holding it together. We trace along it, sort of like going along the surface of a body, but we run along it to go just across to the other side. Rather than ever reaching a goal, it pulls us around to the other side of this process that'll start over and over and over again, where the subject or not the subject, the object is never, it's never quite satisfied. My point is, we try to free ourselves from this thing that determines what our desires can be and what our, process for engaging with that desire is going to be. Try to destroy it. And then it seems to kind of naturally recoagulate and reassemble. Or people erect new ones. Lacan's very pessimistic. He's not very fond of a lot of people. He's like, people just erect new ones. I think that's the problem. You try to get rid of this thing, and then it's just what you're going to. And most of the time, he said, most of the time, social problems. The suggestion is not to destroy or get rid of the master signifier. It's to propose a new one, and it's like let's just kind of police each other, but in this slightly different way, where we use this slightly different terminology, and it's like we're gonna like the hippie movement or whatever. You know what I mean? It's like. There's a certain set of social codes that follow a certain signifier, a certain set of signifiers. The master signifier isn't one big signifier or symbol. It's like it can be a whole host of symbols and signifiers. So like, free love or whatever. It's like, don't harsh my mellow. That's a part of the, the dictum, the fucking injunction, which isn't the same as other, where it's like, people are, why are you asserting this new master signifier, man? That's what I would say. And they would say, well, to get rid of the old previous bummer master signifier. And I would be like, what the fuck? We're just going infinitely across, whatever. And that's what Lacan says is all we can do. That's the point. Lacan says that is all we can do. He's pessimistic. He says we're stuck, we're fucked, we're gonna have a master signifier. It's gonna keep recoagulating or we're going to keep differentially articulating master within the boundaries of a mastered signifier, or what they would call it, whatever. So the thing is, though, that it seems like D&G, right, see this and are like, well, this is true. This is a very accurate analysis for the experience of a capitalist subject, right? And so it's very relevant. It's a very good analysis, but it's not the only way to be. That's where Lacan is wrong, is that that's just that's our destiny. It just seems like our destiny in the same way that capitalism seems natural. You know what I mean? And Zizek is going in this direction where he's like, I think I can take Hegel. I can take the kind of weird world of absoluteness, nothingness, indivisible remainders out of Schelling, and I can kind of use Lacan as like this telescope through which to look at Hegel to find some sort of way out of this horrible problem that Lacan is describing, because Zizek agrees. He's like, this is a problem, and it is the state of a capitalist subject. And so he's trying to basically use Hegel as this ontological source, wellspring from which to create arguments for freedom and the capacity to change. And his answer is that the only way to get rid of the master signifier that seems to keep reconstructing itself is to destroy the subject that depends on it. The thing is, the subject depends on a master signifier, the subject as it's being considered by Lacan. The way that Lacan is cognizing a subject, it requires a master signifier. And so Zizek's answer is engage in the destruction of that subject. Like, and he doesn't say it's like a Zen sort of destruction of the subject, like ego, but he says he compares it to Christ on the cross, this destitution, subjective destitution, a state of subjective destitution. So destroy the subject that requires the master signifier rather than focus on them. But so that's the big difference. And Nevid, I just say that, I just try to point that out to try and locate what I know, to try and, about the master signifier or the Noah the father, right? And because I know that you often express like feelings of like you said here, the you felt like it was a lot of just assertions, for a lot of it during the reading, and you expressed something similar when we were reading Hegel, and I just understand that that's I'm trying to, I guess, kind of localize that or locate it in sort of a broader look at these people that I talk about a lot, or that we bring up
just
a
to
lot.
be fair, I'm willing to think that the reason I experience these texts that way is just because I don't really understand all the connective tissue, of the arguments. So I'm not saying they really are just a bunch of bare assertions. I'm just saying they look that way to me because I don't really get the string of inferences that draw to those conclusions.
Yeah, I know. I got that. And I recognize, yeah, you're, otherwise we probably wouldn't have gotten this if you were just like, yeah, this is just baloney, what? Like, you would be like, it'd be really crazy if you were by this point in the book and you just were like, yeah, no, I think it's shit. It's all just slop. It's just, yeah, that'd be kind of cool. But I mean, I'm glad we're not there. That's good.
And that's helpful. I put in the chat, and Chase sort of affirmed that I guess the alternative that so if Lacan says we're kind of stuck here and we can't get rid of this master signifier, and the master signifier is always going to generate the kind of this particular kind of subjectivity, and we're kind of stuck, then maybe part of what D and G are saying is, no, one way out of this is this nomadic subject. Is that, yeah.
Yeah, so they're always gonna have, kind of this, they got the two poles of investment here, but it's same thing with 1,000 Plateaus. They have, they've got these poles that are kind of like, oh, here's stratification here, and here's, the body without organs as this kind of liberated subjectivity, or whatever you want to call it. So they're always going to think that there's ways to kind of tweak the system to at least turn it towards something revolutionary relatively. Although they probably wouldn't, they don't have some kind of like, total like pre-packaged like revolutionary idea system kind of like there. I mean, just, sees the means of production like a very crass interpretation of Marx or something. But yeah, so I thought about writing an essay about how 1,000 Plateaus was kind of a response to Discipline and Punish. And the way that Discipline and Punish, it talks about, so Foucault he talks a little bit about, there's like, oh, these pockets of resistance occasionally here, or these masses that, they have hard time kind of controlling them. you know, but it's usually just kind of like, okay, so this is the innovation they made to finally control them, you know. And so he's not very interested, at least in Discipline and Punish, about saying that there's, you know, some kind of line of flight out of this situation. So I was thinking like, okay, you can read A Thousand Plateaus and show like how they seem to be responding to this and saying like, here's some solutions that we can possibly implement so that we can, so they talk about assemblages in A Thousand Plateaus, but it's kind of the same thing as kind of like machines for the most part. But they say like, okay, these assemblages, they always have one side turned towards the strata, these kind of, you know, segmentations that lock people into something, or not just people, you know, obviously. And there's also this side that is turned towards the plane of immanence, which is the biothet organs, and that's where all this cool, you know, free stuff happens. So they're saying schizoanalysis is about kind of determining the points at where stratification happens and where it can be turned towards the plane of immanence. So there's never going to be some kind of like absolute one way or the other. It's always about kind of like handling mixtures, because everything concrete and that's in existence is a mixture. And it's about, and they just, you constantly see this, like these two poles, you know, basically free thing on this pole, not free thing on the other pole. How can we just shift over to the free pole by looking at these mixtures? And that's what schizoanalysis is. So yeah, I think it's definitely true. And that's what they're trying to do with subjectivity and with all this crazy shit, really, is be like, okay, how can we just mix up these codes enough, you know, in our subjectivity to really actually have something that is outside of this very, you know, domineering structure of subjectivity that is, you know, our lives today. I think that's what a lot of what they're doing is interested in that. So one thing I wanted to add, that I think what Hunter's talking about with the, you know, the despotic signifier and kind of like the, you know, the signifying chains and whatnot. So I think the way that Lacan is doing that and saying, yeah, there's kind of like a despotic signifier that kind of like says like, no, this is your desire right here, you know, this is it. But then it turns out that's this kind of empty thing, you know, and instead the chain starts over again. I think that makes a lot of sense in terms of what D and G talk about, and that the guide by Holland makes a lot more clear that this is what that anti-production that is then infused into production, that's what's going on here. That's why empty is kind of, or that's why desire is kind of empty now, because it's always being kind of deflected towards something else. And that's where Lacan makes sense. But if you think about it, okay, to go back to kind of like the silly kind of like dramatized example I was using, okay, or, you know, the family teaches you, you know, to be the good son or daughter or whoever you are, but then it's always kind of doing this, you know, what is good, it's kind of, you have to be able to internalize certain things. You have to be able to delay satisfaction and gratification of your desire. So desire is something that is experienced as a kind of lack, a void. Instead, because if you think about it, that is I think that for a lot of, that's kind of our experience, you know, in the sense that, okay, say my desires, you know, I want to do this cool thing. I would okay, say we're add this like the intensity of my libido. I've got this desire, but social situation to make it where I can only really and because my father was like, you know, don't be doing weird shit, you know, you gotta do this, be normal. And then my brother's definitely like, be normal, chase social norms, all about it. That probably counts as bingo, by the way. And then I'm like, okay, fine. So I'll be like, okay, I need to satisfy my desire. I'm gonna get, you know, a girlfriend or something. And then like, oh wait, I need money first for this to work. So then you get, once again, you're back into the whole social field and whatnot, but you're caught up now in this signifying chain of trying to find the thing that satisfies desire and finding that, oh, look, it's empty, just like the other thing. These things can only point to other things that will supposedly satisfy my desire. Oh, the raise, that's it. I'll get the raise, I'll have money, it'll be good. I get the raise and I just have more stress and responsibility. I'm like, oh, but the retirement, finally retirement will be the thing, you know? And that's ultimately what it all comes. I think the signifying chain usually will kind of go to retirement, but then of course it never ends there. But the thing is, this is not necessarily going to be, I would say, totally a universal human thing. For at least there's parts specific to capitalism that I think they want to point to, in the sense that it was not always like this constant deferred gratification that we've internalized. And that is, but what is that? That's this thing where we've internalized what? Anti-production becomes part of production. So any kind of surplus, I would feel guilty, you know, just you know, the expenditure of all that surplus without going back into production. So this is the stuff that was it last week when Joe's here, we're talking about, you know, this constant feeling of needing to be productive. Like, where do we get that? Like, people probably did not have that 3,000 years ago. That's going to be my guess. I'm guessing, or longer, you know, I'm guessing people, I don't know, Homeric, like Greek people, were not just like, oh, got to be productive, you know, got to make that bank. Oh, I mean,
I would agree
knows?
with you as long as we just qualify it, right? Like people felt a need to be productive, but not productive for the sake of being productive, right? People
yeah, exactly, yeah.
They got hungry, so they sowed their fields. You know what I mean? Like they did have a need to be productive, just not like we are today. Feel the need to be productive for the sake of being productive, right? I'm agreeing with you. I just wanted to, like, you know, make sure we're clear.
So you know, one of the things I forgot the guy. Maybe one of you remember the guy who said that a lot of capitalist values derive from the Puritans and, you know, early Protestant influences.
Weber.
Yeah, Weber.
There you go, Weber.
There's a, yeah.
And so they, you know, wouldn't he say that a lot like this obsession with productivity, at least is partly traceable to their influence. And so, you know, what would Deleuze and Guattari say about that? You know, if you know that they somehow already were infected by this, then they imported it here.
Yeah, I think they're making a similar connection in the sense that, so they're connecting, you know, this kind of aesthetic values with capitalism, and also with this idea of this kind of charge of productivity, you know, production for the sake of production, where now I'll produce and it's like totally disconnected from, I mean, there's this kind of weird ambiance where it is like, oh my God, if I don't have a job, I could like just like be homeless and die. I could just like end up on the streets and just die. And like it happens every day. It's happening right now. But at the same time, I've got this thing of, okay, think about to be a good citizen, good father, whatnot, like you never know when, like something's going to happen, and to provide for not just yourself, but your family, you have to kind of keep going. You have to like maximize accumulation. If you sit there, you like blow your money on coke and strippers, you're not being a good dad. You're not being a good citizen. Instead, you need that Protestant work ethic. And I think that is definitely, they're making that connection of, capitalism, and also this, a kind of, they're using Nietzsche, like thinking of this kind of like asceticism, these ascetic ideals. And that's something that I did not make that connection until I like basically like read this book, and I was like, oh, I see that. Okay, that makes sense. And that I have to constantly save money and do all this stuff. And I think that's what's going on with the aesthetic ideal and the way that it's so dispersed, but yet why is it that way? It's not that's not the only factor. I think what's kind of unique to their contribution is that they're connecting that with, okay, there's these social forces, like the fact that the death instinct is this kind of ambient feature of my life, and I could be homeless or whatever, like on the street, if I don't do all these things and kind of go along with all this stuff. If I don't listen to my boss and do what the fuck he tells me to do, I will, you gotta listen to somebody as the boss, usually, otherwise you will starve. And the way that those connect, I think that made sense to me in a kind of horrifying way, but I have not read Engel's Origins of the Family, although I know this book is influenced by it. I don't know. That would be interesting to see exactly. I wonder. I'm not sure exactly what Engel's argument is, although I'm sure it's quite similar to, in some ways, to what's going on here. What's going on with Max Weber too. It seems like I think Nathan, I believe, seemed to kind of hint that he had read it before. I may be totally wrong by that though. But anyways, yeah.
Where did Hunter go?
Oh, he did leave. Oh, it's 8:42. Oh. I mean, I can keep ranting. I don't know. We're everybody's quiet today. Yeah, except me, because I have to keep talking.
Dylan and Joseph were writing a fair amount in the chat. Maybe they want to bring something up.
Just writing ideas as I was listening to Chase talk. I mean, I suppose my understanding, or at least my mental image that came into this picture, was to look at capitalism as like a giant circle, and if you look at the family unit within that circle of fecundity, it kind of inherits it from the outer class, and that everything in that family unit, in that predefined ideological structure of capitalism, has some type of signification, either social or monetary, and nothing's really created in that family unit. It's just fecundity that inherits all these ideological concepts from the capitalist Oedipal model, where they seem to be suggesting that breaking that down and deterritorializing it is the way to go. So instead of looking at the family unit as kind of like a subclass that inherits its ideas of circles, each unit is its own tribe, its own, every family is like a triangle linked to a square, linked to a rectangle, linked to an obtuse, linked to something else. And it's that deterritorialization that doesn't just reduce sexuality to fecundity and the desires that money has signified as appropriate. I think he's encouraging us as social creatures to see that sexual expression is something that produces desire in us. Like sexual expression is not just privatized. Sexual expression is part of forming communities and tribes. And that's what the psychoanalytic approach got right, was that there is sexuality tied to this, but it's not just based in production for the sake of what we deem as desirable. It's those individual tribes, those units with their own inscriptions and their own codes that allow sexual expression to be productive in that fashion, relating to one another. That I think is what he's saying is the purpose of this, the psychoanalytic approach. I think he says on 277, every unconscious investment mobilizes a delirious interplay of divestments, of counter investments, of over investments. But we have seen in the context that there are two major types of social investments, segregative and nomadic, just as there were two poles of delirium. So I like that, because the family unit is its own nomadic segregation with its own codes and flows. And that forms kind of a structure without the confined ideological limits of what it is we think we desire. We're allowed to actually express our desire in the family unit if it's not under these aspects that, well, your sexuality, something needs to be privatized, it can be reduced to something is based of, well, you want to sleep with your mother and murder your father. It needs to be something that is allowed to be expressed and developed and maintained in a healthy fashion, so that each person can come up with their own flows in codes and sexual expression, which is part of that, not just in, not just sex, but it's part of the family unit of what we consider an affiliation. The family, it's like focus on the family, get back to the Bible compared to, okay, what are you, what do you want to do, and how do you want to express yourself? Those are two very different parental approaches. So I like that. I like that he's saying that there's something inherent in the family unit that can, be brought about in challenging the theater of what it is that we have accepted as the social norm. It's not doomed to failure. It's just that when we allow it to have something else transcribe what we think is productive, that's when it is doomed to failure and paranoia and delirium or symptoms of it.
Yeah, I think that's right. One thing that kind of reminds me of is the kind of Spinozist ethics that Deleuze takes, where so there's no good and evil is not a kind of like an intrinsic thing to any one thing, is not good or evil, but you evaluate things based off of these affective relations. So it's more about how bodies kind of interact and form composites than any one thing itself. And I think they're thinking of the same thing also in terms of, something like the family, especially, starting from this kind of position in the middle of the family, that, the question, it's really kind of like Spinoza, where we start kind of just in our body, and we experience these affects from other bodies, and we can only go from there to try to kind of like select what gives us joy and try to decrease these interactions that decrease our power, that bring sadness. Instead, push things in the direction of these encounters that enable us to have good affects of joy, to increase our power, not like political power, but power as capacity, as possibility to realize what we can actually do, because we don't yet know what a body can do. Instead, we need to create it, discover it, and that's what increasing our power does. It increases our power to inject some novelty into the world. And so I think that would be the same thing of anything. It's kind of schizoanalysis, kind of like take something, whatever it is, and look at it and see, it's this mixture, but kind of do some chemical operations on it and see, what possibilities does it have and what dangers are kind of within it, and go from there. And I think they're doing this, the same thing would be a kind of like a schizoanalysis of the family would be the same thing. Seeing is, there's plenty of liberatory possibilities or whatever in your family. I think that's kind of obvious. But I like that they had, there's a kind of complexity or a subtlety to the way that analysis is used that I think is just refreshing, rather than a kind of like universal like denunciation, say, of the family, which then becomes a kind of like almost like a moral imperative to like, you better not have a family, you're not a good revolutionary if you have a family, if you're not, whatever, don't have this kind of ascetic, relation with everything for some, revolutionary purpose, then you're bad. You should feel guilty. That's bad. No guilt in the Spinoza's ethics. Guilt is a sad affect that decreases your power. Instead, it's increased power. So, that's what I'm trying to do. It's not working though. Actually, that kind of is. I don't know. Sorry.
I have two sort of questions, more detailed. On 267, still in the Oedipus at last, at the end of it's like right down at the bottom before the last little start of the next paragraph, in parentheses, Oedipus can be a myth, a tragedy, or a dream. It always expresses the displacement of the limit. I feel like that's pretty important to understand, though I don't quite. If you guys could give me your take on that. And the second one is they kind of somewhat correlate the pole of paranoia with the molar aggregates and schizophrenia with molecular elements. That as well. I never saw that really being connected. So yeah, I guess those two questions.
Yeah, so the molar and the molecular. So think, what are some molar aggregates? Whole persons or global persons, those are going to be molar aggregates. So that's one example of kind of, so the same thing with, in chapter 1, where they're talking about partial objects, that's going to be molecular. So molecular is going to be having to do with flows in partial objects. So it's kind of connecting with what they're talking about in those, mainly the first two chapters, about, it's about these partial objects. That's what desire really goes for, outside of this kind of repressive force that would instead have us focus on, just like a person, say, or some fetish of something, whatever it is. So I think the way that, so if you think about like schizophrenia is it's not really supposed to be it's a release of, you know, a freedom of desire, kind of like an increase of power in desire itself. But it doesn't have any kind of one direct object, especially that we think of as kind of like a, well, you know, it's like Kant's like transcendental object of all the categories or whatever. It doesn't have to like fit in this sense of this object, but instead it's going to be something that is kind of flowing outside of any of those structures, and by that it will kind of release these things in the same way that schizophrenia, what it is like the freedom of desire. So it's always going to go against any kind of confining structure. That's kind of what it is. Yeah, that, so, well, okay. But yeah, I think if you think of it as, okay, schizophrenia is not about persons or some institution, or, you know, schizophrenics probably don't desire, you know, like the US Army or something like that. Instead, where's the desire of the schizophrenic? It's in just like this tangent to what we know as like the normal object of desire. Instead, it's on this flow that I cannot name, because it's always kind of like outside of some kind of representation that us normies would have, you know. So I think if you think of it that way, and what they're saying is that, okay, well, those things that kind of escape those are those molecular flows, you know, which they're talking about. But, you know, why is that connect? But why paranoia with the molar? I think that's because paranoia kind of, so if I remember correctly, they say it's kind of like a reflux kind of thing. It has this kind of reflective quality. I think it's because, okay, I feel paranoia. What is it going to latch onto? I think usually it would be something like a kind of group formation of some type. Well, we think about, okay, like just like your standard like conspiracy theorist kind of thing. They're not gonna, I think like a real schizo maybe would have some paranoia possibly about, you know, like, okay, yeah, aliens and machines or something. But the paranoiac proper, you know, at least in Deleuze and Guattari's idea, is that, but it wouldn't be kind of just like, you know, some specific one alien that's like, I feel like connecting with my brain or whatever. It would just be like this group of aliens, the reptoids that are connected with the Democrats and the Satanists. And so it's working with like people, be like, oh yeah, like whatever, Hillary Clinton, definitely reptilian. Which, by the way, as an aside, I think if anyone's reptilian, it's probably Hillary Clinton. It's my guess. But yeah, paranoia is gonna be working with those people and these groups, and it's kind of like this latching onto things with objects with fear and connecting those. Where I think the schizophrenic, it just, the things it makes connections with are just on another level from those group objects that we could normally name. Yeah, so I think that's why. And yeah, did that help someone? I feel like I'm
No, yeah, honestly,
always, but
no, it honestly seems like I should have known that. It kind of seems obvious now. But yeah, no, the other thing I was still wondering about, the Oedipus expressing the displacement of the limit, which seems a little harder.
yeah, that one, yes, they go through this whole thing of all these limits, And so I was reading so online there's a bunch of Deleuze's lectures, his class lectures, and they're really useful. I'll say that. And then he goes pretty slow, and it kind of he repeats himself a lot actually. And there's one I was reading, and he was talking about limits, and it was just he gave something like a description of something like 10 different ideas of the limit in the 17th century, and just like named all these. And I was like, what the fuck? So I see that there's something like that going on here too. He likes types of limits apparently. Yeah. So the one about Oedipus is the displaced limit. So I think that has to do with the fact that, okay, so this was something that when I was reading it, and I was kind of like, oh, I feel like this is difficult to like wrap my head around when I'm totally like trying to get all this other stuff in there. So this part was kind of like, bleh, but I think so if you think about it, go back, okay, with the primitive territorial machine, it's the displaced limit, and it's vacant. It's not occupied because people, and this has to do with the incest prohibition, because people don't, incest isn't going on with people. Instead, it's the prohibition that names the people, that kind of defines them as positions. So if I'm doing incest, it's on this level where there's no longer people. We kind of like blend together in an intensity. And if the prohibition is operative as this kind of repressing feature, then it's naming people, and then there's the possibility of incest. So, but it's displaced in the sense that it's not there. It's just it's simply just displacement would be in a way kind of saying like it's inaccurate, it's false. That is not what desire is doing in this social formation. And then it becomes symbolic in the despotic imperial. So that's where, okay, incest becomes something that is possible, but it becomes instead as a displaced limit that's kind of way outside. Instead, it becomes symbolically occupied, but it's only the despot that's allowed to do this symbolically for the most part. And if you violate that, that's a way of kind of saying that you want to kill the king and, sleep with the queen or whatever. So there's a kind of, on the level of these large political formations, a kind of symbolic thing going on there. But it's still, so that's when it's entered this place of symbolic occupation as like the repressing function, but it's still on the same thing as a literal lived thing. It's displaced because it's just inaccurate still. It's not, that's not people's, lived realities. And then finally it gets to the capitalist formation, and now it occupies all three of these different, this kind of tripartite thing about the incest prohibition, where now it becomes possible, I think, for the first time. Well, it can only be a negative, because before it was you will have the incest prohibition, but it's subjugated to either like an alliance relation. So yeah, I don't have sex with my sister or marry my sister because I need to use her, like my family needs her for these alliances, because we have, whatever debt to the ancestors, or like a gift economy. We're in debt to this tribe. Okay, sister, pack your bags, you're going over there, you know. And now instead, it's purely negative. It can only apply to the fact that you just simply don't do it, you know, because why would anyone want to, you know? We have no understanding of like the positive or the negative anymore. It's just purely negative. And that's, so it becomes a kind of lived reality in the same way, but as just simply the negative that kind of defines still something we live, is we live amongst our prohibited, well, these kind of like molar formations of social determinations and whatnot. Yeah. So I think that's where trying to get all these right. So it's like the first one is like the representative of desire, which that's the one they're saying like that's kind of like how desires is operating. And then there's the repressing representation, which is what tries to like block desire in a social formation. But how it tries to block it is by saying that you want what is being prohibited. Even though it's not accurate, it's actually the representative that's what is desired. You know, kind of like so in the despotic formation, the representative of desire at that point, it's like revolution or something. It's like revolt from the king. You know, that's what we really want. We don't care about the queen. We don't want to, whatever. So that's where the repressing representative would be like, oh, you want to, you know, kill me and take over politically, whatever. In fact, the real desire is to kind of like get out of the whole thing and start over, whatever. But in the capitalist formation, it becomes kind of, there's almost like a redundancy with the repressing and the representative, because the representative for the first time actually becomes connected with those prohibitions. And if you don't believe me, go to pornhub.com and look at it. Yeah, and you'll see it's a fashionable thing. So, but weirdly, it's at the same time, it's still kind of displacement, but it's kind of like this molar aggregate that people still will focus on, because we kind of have to focus on people, because we haven't abstracted our desire enough to kind of reach the level of these consistency of molecular kind of flows, where I think it almost, but you know, like what the fuck does that even mean? I think it'd be kind of like, you'd almost just kind of like directly feel the desire as something, and it wouldn't be something that is mediated through, say, like representative images or whatnot, or hashtags, or anything I could probably like type into like Pornhub or something. But because we're, you know, our flows of desire are directed, you know, through these electronic circuits, through these signifying operations, it becomes then both a repressed representative and also the representative of desire simultaneously, while at the same time being displaced, because desire isn't actually, you know, that isn't actually what we desire. Instead, this is kind of like, oh, this is the substitute for desire that we are kind of channeled into. Oh, hopefully that made sense. Oh, Eric, I cannot do go to the pub or anything, so I have to write a goddamn essay or it's not an essay, it's an article for this zine thing, so I can be a published author and make my my daddy and mommy proud, so I'll be a good Oedipus subject.
It's good. Arsenal are gonna lose.
Honestly, I think it's going to be I think it's going to be a good game for the neutral. Because, okay, so Manchester United looks like they found a little bit of form. You know, Arsenal's playing pretty well. So I'll look for it. I'm looking forward to it. Yeah. I wish I could do it. But unfortunately, yeah. Oh, is it 9 o'clock now? Yep. God, I feel like I like ranted like all day. Not all day. Yeah.
Well, given that most of us are clueless, the rants are often helpful. So
I appreciate it, Chase. You're a champ.
Awesome. Thank you. That actually means a lot.
yeah, sorry that you're kind of on point all the time, but you've studied this stuff a lot more than the rest of us, so we appreciate it.
Yeah, it's all good. Oh, although yeah, I'm thinking after we finish Anti-Oedipus, I'll probably have to I still have all these investments in other parts of the social field that are keeping me from doing my thesis. And I think this will probably have to be, whatever we end up doing after, I'll probably have to let it go on its own without me for at least a little bit.
So
yeah.
even probably in the spring, you won't be able to participate.
Probably not. But I mean, I don't know. It's all hypothetical. Is I think you would, if it's not something that's kind of, oh, my throat, something that's like directly related to my thesis, I probably wouldn't be able to. And I wouldn't want to make people do something directly related to my thesis. That seems like it would be overcoding.
Well,
and you've already sacrificed enough just doing this book. So yeah.
you're doing an independent study on ethics? Aesthetics.
Yeah. Well, so not really. So someone else is, but I'm just kind of like auditing a few things for it.
Okay.
Yeah. Although I want to do a chapter in my thesis on art, aesthetics. So yeah, that's why I wanted to know some more about what Kant had to say in,
Judgment.
this stupid book. Well, I don't know if it's stupid, but I've been wanting to read this for a while. Unfortunately, now apparently I have to read 50 pages in like 6 days, on top of writing this article, and on top of the fact that I have to like finish. I still have to like write my thesis, and I also have to give my cat like medication every 12 hours and all this stuff. Whatever. Arsenal's still gonna win, hopefully. Yeah.
We'll see.
So if yeah, I mean, who knows what the group will vote on. If we I feel like I'm putting pressure on you, but if we read a book that was kind of in your wheelhouse for your thesis, would that, I don't know, you probably still wouldn't have time to, I'm guessing.
Yeah, that's where I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I think
What if
maybe.
If we chose Thousand Plateaus for the next book, then you'd have no choice. You have to.
Yeah.
Honestly, that, yeah, I would have to do that. I mean, that's pretty, I mean, okay, so this seminar, once again, it like helped me with this book so the thing is, I really kind of need to read the 3rd chapter of this book for my thesis. That was my idea. But then my thesis advisor was saying, we also kind of need the 1st and the 2nd chapter. And I was like, oh God, I don't have time to do this. And then, so when this happened, it was kind of like, okay, I'm going to just do it then, because I was thinking like, oh, how can I kind of get out of not having to read all this? So I kind of like read some parts like really quickly and didn't really get much out of it. But now that I've gone through like pretty methodically, and a lot of times have read parts like 3 times, basically, I I've got a pretty good idea, relatively, I think, of what is going on here. That so it didn't help me much with the summer in terms of like writing my thesis, but I think it'll definitely help me now that I've done it, and I don't have to do any more reading because I've read all of 1,000 Plateaus, and this book is about to be done. So yeah, but yeah, if there was 1,000 Plateaus, if it really was the next thing, which I would feel kind of bad for people if they were being subjected to so much Deleuze and Guattari, and there'd be maybe this is the ascetic ideal, the bad conscience kind of channeling, and but you know, it'd be kind of cool to have like maybe like one plateau after to kind of wrap things up. The body of that organ's one. That might not be a bad one. It's pretty short. I think it's less, maybe like less than 20 pages.
Yeah, maybe we could do that.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Obviously, speculation. We'll see what other people want. I don't want to despotically overcode anything really. So yeah, maybe.
Okay, well, we'll miss you if you can't join, but do what you got to do.
Yeah,
You got to get that thing done.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. See you later.
Okay, we'll see you.